I'll go through some of the questions I was given to me. And the first one was about the location. And as far as I know, from my observation of other farms, this is about as close as you'd usually find them. Sometimes you'd find them farther away from this, maybe 20, 30 feet, or a little bit more than that, but always in a close proximity to the main house. And basically one reason you want it close to the main house, because a lot of times you're going back and forth from one building to another and you don't want to travel any farther than you have to. And did most homesteads have one? I would say most farm homesteads would have had one up including probably the early 1900s. One of the later summer kitchens I observed was built either in the 1890s or early 1900s. And I've never seen a summer house that was built at the same time that the main house would have been built, or the principal residence.
You're saying they were always probably built later on?
Always built later on, yes.
Do you have any idea when this was?
My idea there from examining the original structure, I'm guessing at the earliest the late 1850s, but I'm guessing somewhere in the 1860s. From my knowledge of the construction and comparing it to other buildings that were built in the 1860s, that's my guess best, in the 1860s anyway.
So it's not really that much newer than the house. I mean,
1843 is this house. Yeah, that at earliest 1850s. But I'm saying more like in the 1860s sometime. The latest.
20 years.
Pardon?
Later, 20 years later?
Yeah, something like that, yes. Mm-hmm.
Is it possible there was a summer house before this and it burned down because quite frequently they've lost
I think so.
due to accidents?
And in some cases, they'd also have a summer kitchen in the basement of a house. In my own house, there was a summer kitchen in the basement before they built the other house. It had a fireplace there, and it even had a drain on the floor in the house I live in, which might be the exception. I don't know, but the construction methods here are basically the same as the main house, which is basically a timber frame building, a post and beam building, where you have timbers that are mortised and tenon together. I'm not sure if everybody understands what mortise and tenon construction is or not. It's where you have large pieces of wood that have hollow places cut out for tongues to go in them, and they're pinned together with wooden pins instead of nails. And that kind of construction was existing up probably up until at least the 1930s on the latest on farm buildings. I have talked to carpenters that told me, well, they helped so-and-so put up a timber frame shed or a barn or whatever, probably in the 1930s at probably the latest. Basically, there are some differences in the procedures for erection, but I won't go into those kind of details. They're not really relevant at this point. Something that was especially different in this summer house than in the house is the inside walls are wainscoted from the floor to the ceiling. That's one of the most noticeable differences from one building to the other. I suppose a lot of people will call that paneling, and technically I don't think you could call that paneling because it's not any different than wainscoting you have from the floor to a window stool. And also in my own house, I have wainscoting in one place in my house that's 6.5 feet high in one area, what used to be the kitchen. And above that it's plastered. So there's differences in construction from one house to another.
Would that be because it would be easier to clean the plaster?
Yeah, this was in the kitchen area right where there was a sink. In our house was wainscoting up 6.5 feet. and the rest of the kitchen was only under the window stool, as a example of something that's done a little bit different than in another local house. The source of materials, pretty well, materials were probably, might as well say, they're homegrown. The wood is more or less harvested here, but it probably was not sawed in the Schumacher sawmill, because as far as I know, I don't think they converted the sawmill from a up and down or reciprocating sawmill to a circular saw. You have to have a little more power to run a circular saw with the kind of streams we have here compared to an up and down sawmill. And at the time that was built, I could tell that the lumber was sawed on a circular saw by the saw marks on the lumber that was sawed, which had radius or circular saw marks, as opposed to saw marks that go straight across the pieces of wood. The stone for the foundation and the basement, of course, came from the Schumacher stone quarry, which is basically almost north of the hog shed over here in the Riley Creek. That's where all the stone came from for the house, and possibly the barn also. The roofing materials would have been probably white oak shakes. I don't know if they had shingle mills yet in the 1860s or not, but by the 1870s there were at least 2 shingle mills in the community, and one of them was operated by John Cly, who was located where Lynn Miller lives now. Now the only source, one material that wasn't local, of course, was nails, and those would have been cut nails, and those would have been cut in factories out east, like Tremont Nail Company out of Wareham, Massachusetts, which is still a current producer of cut nails. But at that time there was more than one producer of cut nails. Another thing that is similar to the main house here, the summer kitchen also had a basement in it. It was approximately 14 feet by 14 feet under the kitchen area.
What was 14 by 14?
The original basement
Oh, okay.
was under the summer house.
Under the summer kitchen.
And the summer kitchen is about 1 foot farther away from what it was originally from the house. The kitchen area, I think, is about 4 foot longer than what the original kitchen was. When I was doing research for the summer kitchen, I could not get any information how big the porch area was, because that part had been demolished quite a long time ago, and the people that lived here were children, and they couldn't remember how big the porch area was. So when we did excavation, we found out it actually was bigger than what it is currently, probably by about at least 4 or 5 feet. Pretty much the kitchen is sitting almost in exactly the location of the old one. And architecturally, things on the outside are copied from the original summer kitchen. Like we have the white frieze board at the top, a white board underneath the eaves with the large cove molding. That was on the original summer house also.
The construction of the summer kitchen now, is it done with mortise and tenon, or did
No,
we
it's
use
just
modern
stick built,
technique
yeah.
because we were gonna,
Yeah.
because it was all gonna be sheet?
The original siding, as far as I know, was walnut also, which was a very common wood for siding. Both the house and the barn were both sided with walnut.
There was a lot of walnut in the area. at the
Pardon?
time. There was a lot of
Yeah,
walnut
yes,
in the area.
this was a walnut-rich area, yeah. It was also not unusual to have basements or fireplaces in summer houses. I did a little reminiscing about other summer kitchens I visited or observed, and as far as I know of at least 9 other summer kitchens in the community that had fireplaces, and I know of at least 8 that had cellars in them. There probably were more, but I know of at least that many. I know I've had some people comment, well, that wasn't a common thing. Well, depends on where you're at, where you lived, as whether you might have had one or not, or knew of some that did have fireplaces or cellars. But anyway, that's a little bit of a comment about fireplaces and cellars in summer houses. I think that's about all I'll say right now. I better leave something for Seth to say. Is there any questions at this point? I do have a few pictures.
Was the basement basically a root cellar, or?
It could have been used for that, yes. It's basically limestone walls, just like the current basement is here in the house.
And since we're high here, that would have been a fairly dry basement.
Yes. The other thing that contributes to fairly dry area here is there's a lot of rock underneath here that drains fairly well, except when you have a lot of water all at once.
Yeah.
I do have a few pictures on the table in there. It shows some views of the old summer house and also shows some photographs of the excavation when we were doing excavating work.
So if any more questions come in your head, remember them till later. We'll have Seth say about the reconstruction, the rebuilding,
The question was restore or reconstruct. We reconstructed the building.
and that means
We built a brand new one of a replica of the old one. The old one is at Judy and Phil's. So we had a great pattern. We had the architectural dig. Keith dug. We knew exactly where the walls were, and we pushed it out, mainly because we didn't want to disturb that wall. We put another wall down in. Does that answer the reconstruction?
I think so. I just want to make sure that all of our staff understand that the house is restored.
Right.
The summer kitchen is reconstructed. and it's
Reconstructed in the same
not the same
footprint.
thing.
In the same print. We didn't use walnut siding, we used cedar, I think, clear cedar, as this here is also clear cedar. And all the other buildings, I think the house has walnut, so we went with clear cedar, because it'll hold,
It doesn't rot very
it
fast.
don't rot, great. What was my other question? Do I have another question?
do I have another question? How different is it from the original?
I think Keith went to that. I think we're really on the same print. The biggest difference, our chimney is a lot bigger, only because of safety. The old one would probably only have 1 or 2 bricks. We went with like 3 bricks, and we didn't taper it in as quick, and we put a flue liner in it, so the size of the chimney is probably double, Keith.
Almost.
Maybe double the size that I'd like to see it. But we did it mainly for safety, and we had to do that.
How about on the inside?
The inside, I think the fireplace is exactly the same.
Right.
Because we know the opening because we had that. So that's the exact print. I'm gonna be real quick.
You said exact print. No, you mean you have the original plans?
We have the original summer kitchen, and it's at Phil and Judy's homestead. So we do have it. Phil took it and moved it.
You know that thing we have, if you're facing the barn to the left out toward
That's
the
it.
windbreak, there's a
Building, summer
a
kitchen.
building that looks like it's falling apart. That's the old summer kitchen.
Oh, I see. I thought
Still
you meant
moved.
say a paper plan.
No, actually, no, sorry. No, the
We have
actual
the
building
original
was,
to look at.
it was
Yeah,
here, it
yeah.
had gotten
Summer kitchen.
moved, and then Phil moved it again.
And it just wasn't, it
It
wasn't
was
restored.
pretty well gone from what, Phil? 2 feet down?
Yeah.
It needs replaced, so we went with a new construction.
Is there anything in the summer kitchen that was originally in the old one?
Yes. The lock on the north door.
But we do have this door lock also. We had another lock, right?
Yeah, but it's not from the summer house.
Was not the arch, that steel arch in the...
No, it was from someone else's.
Okay, yeah, the steel arches are from another summer house, from the Isaac Hildy summer house there at the edge of Pandora, where the Hildy home is. That was salvaged from that fireplace.
And the arch he's talking about is the piece of steel that actually holds up the bricks, right?
Yeah, there's 2 of them under there.
Okay.
what do we say if a visitor asks us, did they have that kind of roofs back then?
That's a secondary roof. It probably had a wood shake.
So we should
yeah.
say they used wood shade.
Yeah, and we did this mainly for fire safety. I mean, our insurance man was really not wanting wood shingles, especially if you don't live here. Your fire ain't clear out. You know, we don't have the babysitter time for that.
So we can say
That's a secondary
that's
roof.
not authentic, but it's for safety.
And these
Neither is
roofs,
the house.
Yeah, not
neither is
either
the
building.
house.
And the house, the same thing.
Right. These roofs come in probably, Keith, when did these roofs come in? These are in the,
Oh, they started putting standing seam on probably 1870s or so.
okay. So it's after the house was built, maybe 40 years, they've got this roof. And we just took that roof off 3 years ago that was on there for, goodness, 100 plus years.
Well, the roof actually been all tore apart
Well, that's
rebuilding
true.
this
It
house.
blew away, but
Yeah.
anyhow, it was there. I mean, these roofs here, this one here is probably all of 100 years old.
I would say there's a shingle roof underneath there, I believe.
Right. But
Yeah.
this is the second roof that's at least, 80 years old?
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
So we can say this is an old style of roof,
Right.
although it is not
Yeah.
like the original.
No, they had wood shakes or wood shingles.
Thank you.
When you saying the word shake,
Well,
what does that mean? Like shingles or
shingles,
not?
like,
Yeah.
how long do they last?
No, how long?
How big
Oh,
were they?
they were big.
Oh, the shakes are about this long.
Okay.
I have some samples in the barn, original ones.
So they're longer than what's available now.
Absolutely.
And the way this is done on the bread oven over here, where it kind of sticks up at the top
Right.
on one side,
Yeah,
that's exactly what they would have done.
yeah. But with the handmade shingles.
Okay. So they didn't come down. I know on roofs today they come down with a seam across the top.
No, they didn't do that with the metal cap then yet.
Okay.
That would then they would have had it towards the prevailing wind.
Yeah. These overlap this way since the prevailing wind is this way, more or less, so you'd have it that way and not that way.
So it doesn't tear the roof off.
Yeah. Another thing that's an artifact in the summer house, it's not from here, but it's a fireplace crane is there, that's in there is from the Peter Bixel Jr. farm, and that's a farm that's 2 farms south of Ebenezer Church on the west side. Basinger family currently owns that farm, and I got that crane from Franklin Basinger, who some of you knew Frank Basinger.
How can you define what you mean by a train here?
A crane?
Crane.
Crane. That's the arm that swings in and out.
Crane.
Crane,
I
yes.
thought he said train.
Fireplace there. that-
Fireplace crane.
Crane came from another place.
Yeah,
That would have
from
been similar.
Yeah. Just like the
Well, when we
fireplace.
go in-
Yeah.
When we go in there, there's more than the kitchen room. So what happens in the rest of the building?
The other room we think was probably, a laundry room maybe. We've got a little room there that they may have done laundry, or that's this next little narrow one. They might have kept, that would have been down in the basement.
Basement.
That would have been in
Yeah.
the basement storage. This would have probably been, I think, more of a washroom.
It had louvers on both sides of the wall also. Now there's a window on that side, and there was a louver on the west side originally.
Might have tried
in the
to
middle
dry
area.
their clothes in there, maybe if it was raining, or
In the winter.
maybe a washroom. Then the furthest up in the porch, there was a dug well. You'll see and we want to get a pump there. So the dug wells are what? 8, 10 feet deep, 12?
At least, yes.
Okay, so that's what we're trying to replicate there, is the dug well, which is clear out into the porch.
I did bring a part of a wooden pump there in the porch area, so you can see what a wooden pump looks like.
We'd like to get that on there sometime, put a wood deck on it, get that pump mounted. And if we actually have water, we could make that like squirt water. So
Also, there's 2 artifacts, one in the kitchen and one in the porch area that did come from the kitchen basement. And one of them is an ember or charcoal iron, basically just the bottom part of it, which was found when the excavating work was done. And also, we found a cast iron pump cylinder about this long that came out of a wooden pump. It's sitting out there in the porch area also. Those are 2 items I'm fairly sure were probably used in the original summer house. They would use a charcoal iron because another kind of iron would not have been practical to heat up in a fireplace because you would have got it all sooty and dirty holding on a flame. So basically, I'm fairly sure they would have used charcoal or ember irons when you're ironing clothes and you just have a fireplace for heat.
Another question you had here, what should we know about the furnishing? The furnishing probably in a summer kitchen was secondary furnishings that come from off the house. You know, they only use this at certain times. So maybe a broken chair with a back off. Not their good dishes. Dishes that were secondary stuff is what I would call it. And he also said it was built maybe in the 65. So generation probably later. So we had later looking furniture, and that's what we're displaying in there is furniture that's made out of ash that's about 1860s, 70s, 80s. The time frame we're trying to pin that to is the second generation. 1860s to 80s, I think that's one of the questions. Here we're trying to pin the first generation from 43 to 65. So we're trying to hold this at the first generation, maybe second. And so you're going to find secondary furnishings in there.
So the thing there will be later.
There's going to be a 20-year spread on that.
Yeah, we
That's
have
good to know.
an eating table in there, or a kitchen, which could have been a food prep table too. But would they have eaten in there, or would they have taken the food into the main
We're getting into
house?
Sandy's
Yeah,
area.
we'll let
He wants
Sandy
to move
answer
in
that.
now,
I think maybe we ought to move in, because
There we go.
Not take off.
Good.
Okay, Sandy? Okay. I'm Sandy Erickson, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about the summer kitchen and some of its specific purposes, and to overlap on what Seth said a little bit about the working area. First of all, I do want to comment on something that Keith said. In the genealogy that we have on the first generation, which was Christian Schumacher and his wife Barbara Lugaveld Schumacher. He was 41 when he came here in about 1835. Okay, and she died in 1855. He died in 1858. And Peter Schumacher, his son, their son, was the second generation to live here. Peter was married to Elizabeth Suter. If we are saying that the summer kitchen was not built until the early 60s, then definitely that was Peter, because his parents were no more by that time. It's possible that it could have been started in the older man's later years. It's possible that it got started, but it may not have been finished before he died. That would be my thought on it. So I think when Keith says it probably didn't get built till the early 60s, probably because Peter would have been a younger man, had a better back, and his brothers probably would have helped him. A lot more children.
A lot more children, right? Well, maybe not yet, but yeah, a lot more children. Yeah. In time he did. But then, okay, so back here to furnishings. This was primarily used, the summer kitchen, from May, when the weather finally started getting decent, until pretty much the end of the harvest season, or until the first snowfall came. And in order not to heat up the house, that's why they used the summer kitchen. And as long as they were cooking out here, from a woman's mind, it made a whole lot more sense to put the kids around this table than to take them into the house when you had to be out here anyway tending all of your harvest. So I would say absolutely it makes sense that the family would have eaten out here all summer long. That's my thought. I don't know that, but it makes sense. Also, yeah.
Just a moment. I recall from my great-grandmother's house, though, I don't, when we used to go there, it would be the late 40s and early 50s, they were not using it to eat in, but they talked about doing that. And it was clearly set up as if they had been eating there. So this is already as late as 1950s, and at least in the time that they lived there, say from 1910 or so, until
Well, that's
something, they used it the way you were saying.
Thank you for that, I appreciate that. And by the time you were going there, they were your great-grandparents? They probably were not
Yes.
doing a
Yes.
whole lot of harvest because their kids were gone.
They were already in their,
Okay.
or I should say, great
70s.
grandmother, even more,
Okay.
early 80s.
I realize this is a lot later, but the Peter Lehman's family, large family, kids and old aunts with long bonnets and so on, were very traditionalists right across the road. And they always ate in the summer kitchen as long as the weather permitted, as long as it warm.
Thank you for that. Okay. Purposes of having a summer kitchen. Well, we've kind of started to establish that to be able to take in the harvest. Obviously the men and the older boys, all the muscles were in the field, okay? That's not to say harvest didn't require muscles, but it would be the women and the girls, the younger children. They were in the garden, but they were also in here because obviously you're bringing what's in the garden into the summer kitchen to process it. They would have been making their applesauce and their, I don't know exactly where the butchering would have been done. I did not grow up on a farm, and I'll bet the majority of you know the answer to that question, and I don't. So I'm just going to leave that one.
As far as butchering, I was told by the Jones family there was another building west of here which had a place for at least a couple of kettles you could heat water and things. And that's
So
probably
that
where the
was a
butchering
separate
was.
building, okay. My thought was you would not want to mix blood with all of your produce. So it would have been another building. I wouldn't want to do that anyway. So this would have been mostly for fruits and vegetables to be processed, to be used later in the year, or all winter long. Because obviously they did not have a community market, and they were their own community market. They had to have everything they were going to need for the entire year. And it had to be processed that summer. That's all the time they had. They knew their time frame approximately. You never can predict the weather totally, but they had to do everything in the summer process everything in the summer for the following winter. Another question that I have here then is about cooking, baking, preserving, drying foods, food storage. We'll just take these one at a time. Cooking, obviously. I'm going to get back here. Where's the one I like? Yeah, I use this one. The little one's missing. There's a little stick like this. I like it better, but when this thing's hot, the big one's a good idea. Anyway, this is, I call it a swing arm. Keith, what's the real name?
Crane.
Crane, thank you. To me, a crane is something that arches over a highway. But I understand why this is a crane. It holds something up higher. Okay. And anyway, it moves and makes it possible. You've got a fire here. You've actually got a couple of fires because you've got your back fire, which is your fuel fire that you create that fire first. And you kind of move it back so that you can keep taking from it. So you're always going to have hot embers or something to burn from. And then you have your cooking fire a little bit in front of it. And that one is very much a controlled fire. Cooking fire has to be a controlled fire. Otherwise, you either aren't going to get something done or it's going to get done too fast. It's got to be controlled. And that's just done by a matter of how many coals you let get in there, how much you put on it. The way the fire would have started would have been, back in that day, flint and steel, more than likely. I have started a fire before with flint and steel, and if you've got enough, you can do it pretty easily. If they didn't have flint and steel, then they were doing this stick method, and that's hard. I did that once too. It took about 4 hours.
I'm going to add one more thing. If they had the proper transportation, they would have matches.
Yeah.
Matches were available at least by the middle 1850s already.
They would. But they would have had to have kept them dry. or
And they
would have
wouldn't have been
useless.
very safe because any pressure would set them off.
Pressure?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
just
But
friction.
Would the fourth option be just to go, if you were so unfortunate as to let your fire go out, just
You
to
go to your neighbor's house.
I mean, it's not gonna take 4 hours to ride to your neighbor.
Go to your neighbor's house and do whatever you have to do to keep it alive until you get
Get
home.
some coals.
Right.
Now, what you would use would have been a fire carrier. They're special metal containers with a little handle on for carrying.
Stick out, would you stick out so you can be photographed?
In those days, they also had special fire carriers that were an enclosed metal container with a handle about that long where you could get live embers from one location, take them to another to start another fire.
Okay, great. Cooking would have been done here because cooking usually involved boiling water and putting something in it, generally speaking, or having something in a liquid. Baking, unless it's more like a Dutch oven, baking would have been done in the bake oven outside, all right? That really takes an overall controlled temperature on all sides, you know, spherically. So that would probably have been done in the bake oven. Preserving and drying foods and food storage. Do we still have one? Let me see if this is the right kind. Okay.
Yep.
This is a standard ball jar. I think Mason was first.
Yes.
Mason was first, and Ball came later. This jar does not have the ability to screw on a lid, and so they probably would have put melted wax, candle wax or something over here, this to seal it.
Well, first you put a metal cap on, then you pour melted wax in the groove.
Okay.
There's a little pot up there for wax up there.
Here is the little pot.
That's for melting and
Melting
pouring
the
wax.
wax, and then in here. And there probably would have been, either this would have been put directly on the fire, and there would have been a little spider here.
Yeah, you could
You
do
know what I
that.
mean by a spider?
Mhm.
Okay. An iron thing with about 3 legs on it. Okay, let me put this back up here before I drop it.
Another comment about ball jars, those are made from 1888 to about 1912 or so.
Okay, and whereas Mason came out about the 50s?
1858.
57,
The earlier
58.
wax seal jars were made out of earthenware.
Okay, knowing that, the first Mrs. Schumacher would not have canned, not at all. It wasn't available. But the second Mrs. Schumacher, Elizabeth, may have, but Barbara definitely did not.
You spoke about a spider.
A
Is that,
spider.
is it same as a trivet?
No,
Would have been
it'd be like
taller.
a skillet. That's a spider
Oh,
there.
that's a spider.
Yeah.
This has legs.
Okay.
Okay, so you can put coals under this.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? It needs to be dusted.
It's got spider webs.
That needs to be, you know, I'm gonna have to get in here and clean this before we can use it pretty soon.
Question.
Yes,
You're saying that they could not have canned,
the
but,
first generation.
yes, the first generation. But, now, taking what Keith was saying, that there were earthenware jars, could they have preserved
In a
some
crock.
food
Yes.
in a
In a
crock?
crock.
There were wax sealer
Yeah,
earthenware.
yeah, they were about that high with a groove in them also. Mhm.
They're still around. Find a few at auctions, but they would have done the exact same thing, but they probably didn't do that as much as later on.
Came glassware came.
Yeah, that
And
became,
didn't they do some preservation in crocks with, like filling it with green beans and then pouring
Lard.
lard over top of it and letting the lard solidify? Anything to keep
Keeps the
air out.
Yeah.
And I'm sure in those earlier days, they didn't expect to eat vegetables.
You ate dried stuff, yeah.
Dried stuff.
And sauerkraut.
Sauerkraut, things that had been
You made
preserved.
barrels of sauerkraut.
Okay. You mentioned drying foods. They would have dried their fruits. They could have dried their berries. They would definitely would have dried their apples, their plums. Pears, yeah, that would have all been dried. So if you were going to make, let's say you're going to make an apple pie, and this first snowfall has come, you would have had to have reconstituted the fruit in order to put it into a pie, something like that.
May I ask a question? I was just thinking, growing up on a farm, we had a barrel that was buried in the ground, and we put our root vegetables in there. And we
Your
used
what
them all
vegetables?
winter.
Root.
Root vegetables.
Carrots.
Carrots,
potatoes.
turnips, things like that. We used them all winter. And I would presume they would have done something like that here?
Probably I had them down in the basement.
Yeah.
Peek around the corner.
Well,
Can you hear him?
even apples,
So that the,
You
couldn't
can't be heard.
apples have been, some kept that way?
Yes,
Yes.
apples and
we
potatoes.
weren't raised here.
But the thing with apples, there were storage apples, they weren't quite as moist as the regular, apples that they would have used to dry. The storage apples would have been good up until January for use if they kept them cool. And they weren't even good until January. So the storage apples would have been a totally different kind of apple. I mean, we very rarely see them around here anymore. I think the closest that you can find locally is if someone's growing Arkansas blacks. And the flavor of an Arkansas black isn't good until it's stored for 3 or 4 months. So that's storage apples, that's ones that would have been kept, but the apples they would have used for apple pies would have to have been dried.
Like a Macintosh,
A Cortland or a Winesap or a...
Jonathan Macintosh.
Well, Grandpa Luganville said when you go down to the cellar, always pick the best apple, then you have a pretty good one.
Okay. Did they eat there? We've kind of established that. Yes, they did eat there. Do we know when canning became common in this area? We've kind of established that. How did they start fires? I hit that. What about that? I did all
Can you
right.
say a little bit more about how the drying was done? The fruit.
There is a little building out in the garden that was the drying house, and it's full of, it has what looks like 2 upper cupboard doors and 2 lower cupboard doors and a whole bunch of little shelves that come out that they would have laid their fruit in there to dry, and that's how they
So
would have
just
done it.
sort of air dried rather than sun dried.
Air dried, yeah. Yeah, they weren't really exposed to the sun. Okay, as far as utensils around here, I did want to hit something. I don't know if this is authentic. Is this authentic?
It's a reproduction.
It's a reproduction, okay. But it's something like they would have had. Also, as far as cooking goes,
Just for
These-
point of information, there will be a brew maker at Fall Festival.
fantastic. Okay, the ladles would have been this long, like this, because they're cooking over a fire. One of the hazards of the day, and it's the reason I wore this, one of the hazards of the day was having a long skirt like this and being around the fire all day. It was not uncommon, unfortunately, for a lady to catch her skirt on fire, and there were accidents that way. But having a long ladle, and I'll take the longest one, although this one is from Keith, as I began to cook on the fire here, I started appreciating the handle being longer and longer, so I could stand out here and go like that, okay? That that heat, and also wearing this skirt, I don't know about the other ladies, how you feel about it, but that heat goes right up that skirt, and it's just like, it's warm very fast. So there was always, and Keith, help me if I'm wrong, there was always some kind of a tinder box, wood, so forth here that was close by, and sand and water. I know that in the Scouts, which has nothing to do with this house, that we always told them that they had to have their water, their shovel, and some dirt or something available to put out their fire. I'm looking at Gary. So, and when I started cooking here, I insisted on that too. So, do you have any questions? Oh, we do have the cold
Slaw cutters.
slaw cutters over here.
Crop cutters.
Crop cutters?
Kraut.
Crop cutters, crop cutters. Which is which?
They're both.
They're just different styles.
This
We're
is
known for
serrated. This one's for making coleslaws or shredding stuff. Finally, you can look in there and you can see the
Got it?
and this is for kraut. For slicing whole. I mean, whole
Same
slices.
for sauerkraut.
Yeah, for sauerkraut. You could also use it to slice apples.
Oh, yeah.
If I've got one at home that's adjustable. You just adjust it a little thicker for slicing apples for drying, and that's how they would have had uniformity in slicing apples.
Well, it does have a little area back here where your slice can come through. This, of course, is old and rusty, but there you go.
This is old.
This is old. How old is that?
It's got screws on it, so it's probably 1840s, 50s. I mean, this is old.
If you took the screws out, you could find out a little bit more. If the screws
But I don't want to do that. I really don't want to do that. I've done that before and regret it. You know how long it takes to get a screw out without ruining something?
Also, we've learned about this summer kitchen. I don't know about the original summer kitchen. I only just found out you had the building, and I want to see that. But the windows and the drafting of the fire, I wanted to address that because, of course, when the chimney is cold, the smoke tends to come this way into the room. Once the chimney warms up, of course, the smoke is going to rise a lot better. But we've kind of learned that if you keep all the windows on one side closed, because the door has to always be open, that we can also control the draft in here. That was another thing. And they would have had to figure that out, know that then, in order to be able to work in here without running outside all the time.
You want to say something about exterior fireplace chimney versus an interior?
Yes, the house has an interior chimney and fireplace. The summer kitchen has an exterior fireplace and chimney. And Keith, I forgot why.
It gets rid of the heat faster this way. Basically, the fireplace and the chimney exterior of the building acts as a radiator to get rid of the heat externally. And in the house, you want to trap the heat in there, especially for the winter time to help heat the house. If you have a main house that has a chimney on the outside, you're actually wasting a lot of heat from all the radiation out into the open air. So this is what we want to do here, is get rid of the heat. So that's one of the main reasons the fireplace and the chimney protrude from the end of the building to the outside.
It would have made it a lot easier to, I'm sure this was hot anyway with cooking going all the time in the summertime and the heat and the summer heat, but it would have made it a little bit easier to be in here. They didn't have ceiling fans, so.
Who had responsibility for supplying that wood box and for kindling, and the amount of wood would have been needed would have been considerable.
The woman here would have probably sent a small boy
A small
out
boy.
to go get the wood.
And the wood is being made out in the woods by the men who at various times are making wood and
Cutting wood,
cutting wood.
possibly, and, or, you know, just bringing back fallen limbs and what have you.
And they would have had a special building even called the Wood House, which had more than one purpose.
The woodshed. The woodshed.
Yes. Yeah, children didn't really want to visit the woodshed.
Well, we've been at this an hour and 15 minutes now, and I'm sure we're, still have lots of questions. But I want you to be sure to feel like, you know, if you have to get up and leave.
Just one point. Okay, we have a woods, and for the wood that we want to burn in the winter, we cut it the year before.
So it's seasonal.
I think we can assume that the men would have been cutting,
In the winter.
would have been logging in the winter time for the next year, don't you think?
That way the
Or
sap
even
is
2
down
years.
also.
Yeah.
Question, this is probably more to Keith. When you were talking out there, you said that
Keith, come on.
is, the wainscoting
Yeah.
from top to bottom. Now, could you explain what you mean by wainscoting?
Basically, a wooden covering on the wall. Now, true paneling is a little bit different thing. True paneling pieces are bounded by stiles and rails. And a wainscoted basically is imitating the sideboards on a wagon. That's where the term wains come from. Like a wainwright is a wagon maker, and this sort of imitates the siding on a wagon. In this case, it's from the floor to the ceiling. We don't have stiles and rails that divide things up like true paneling would, historically speaking. I don't know if this is confusing or not, but I do have illustrations at home of old homes that has true paneling on the walls where there are divisions, both vertically and horizontally, that divide the areas up into smaller areas and not just like you see here.
Wainscoting is attached to the wall, whereas the panels and paneling are floating between rails.
Now there's regular wainscot that is only stool height and it's horizontal, and then there's also wainscoting that is paneled. So we have small pieces of wood that are bounded by stiles and rails in a small area below the windows. And that's fairly common also. It's more common than horizontal wainscotings.
The stiles and rails that you're referring to, you're talking about a framework on the back of them.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Well, on the edge of the
Yeah,
paneling,
on the wall.
small pieces of wood, yeah.
Anybody else have any more
They confuse
questions?
you or not. What you need to probably see some pictures of historic buildings to get a better idea.
Do you think that they made butter in here?
I'm quite sure they probably made butter in here, and there is a butter churn, and this is a what style churn?
Dash, turn.
Dash churn. Okay, you look at the bottom of it,
That's the dash,
that's the dash.
the dasher.
My aunt used that kind, and I remember visiting them.
Is that right? And
Yes.
helping out.
Yeah.
One of the things that we're hoping to do, and I think you've got it going, is that we want to be able to churn butter as an
I'm
activity here
working
for
on it.
children. To give them the opportunity to do that. At my age, I have never had the opportunity to do that. I would love to try it. What I have done with children is to put cream into, we don't even have these anymore, into a little film canister, a little plastic film canister, and let them shake it up forever. And eventually, and if they're about 6 years old, they'll shake it. And then open that up, and they have made their own butter. It's white, kind of, but it's butter.
Butter never was yellow.
Butter never was yellow
They-
until
until they added-
oleo at World War II or something like that. Okay, yeah.
Well, we did have yellow butter at home, but we didn't color it. It was because the cows ate a lot of dandelions.
When Seth was talking about the
back room as a laundry room, he was talking about here, where I am looking,
Yeah.
right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that would be the washroom.
Yeah, and then when he's talking about this well area, it's as you go out the door,
And it's to the left, out
to the left, and some people might want to walk out this way and look at it, and then
Okay.
walk on out the other way, if they haven't been here yet. I mean, I don't,
Okay.
maybe everybody has, but, people might want to, come out this way or come around and look at these areas.
They made cheese.
You said it's correct, but probably we ought to keep open the possibility that some farmers did not butchering on their table, but food processing, or processing of the meat. And the reason I say that is because on a rainy day, we did it that way. Sometimes it was brought into the summer house.
As a matter of fact, if I can ask Ken to stand up for just a minute, right behind him, there is, this is a sausage grinder, and this is
Sausage press.
press, right here. Okay, and I'm assuming they did that in here sometimes. They could have.
They probably didn't make large.
Area.
Thank you, everybody.
Which we don't have set up as a laundry area, the kind of storage area.
Good enough. Walk around the garden, walk around.
This is that back area where they had a well. And we hope to revive it at some time. But again, these two areas really aren't set up yet for how.
Okay. This is basically to represent the dug well that was in the porch of the summer house. It would have probably been maybe 18 feet, 20 feet or so. Sometimes when they had a dry year, they would dig them deeper. That was known to have been done in the 1870s around here when they had a dry spell. The blue wooden pump was representative of the kind of a wooden pump they would have had here. With a wooden spout, they also had versions that had iron spouts also. And the thing on the bench here is a cast iron cylinder from the wooden pump that was at this location. This cast iron cylinder was found in the basement here of the original house.